If you hear
Hold
the
on,
company,
we got to stop. I got to see who's calling. Okay. Yeah, we're in the middle of making a video.
Can anybody tell me what's going on? Tell me what's going on?
Within the West, there's kind of this mentality that in Uganda, you're living in a country where there's a dictator. They would consider Museveni to be a dictator. I don't buy all these arguments, but these are basically what you kind of hear the narrative of the U.S. government. But I think a lot of it is because the United States oftentimes wants to portray Uganda in a bad light, because Uganda is one of the few nations that has taken a stand against much of these woke agendas that are infiltrating and destroying much of the rest of the world. And Uganda is not just going along with whatever the United States wants them to do. And so the United States government has motivation to demonize Uganda and to emphasize maybe things like corruption and embezzlement when it occurs, because it makes Uganda look worse and makes the United States' position look better. Just my perspective here. I look at what Uganda was decades ago, say back in the 70s and 80s when it was a war-torn country. Museveni, whatever you want to say about him, he's brought stability to this country. You know, this country is not being torn apart like it used to be, and I've seen how this country has changed just since I was here in 2010, where roads are getting more paved, streetlights are going up, things are improving, cities are being built up. It's still difficult for a lot of people here, but one of the things I noticed is that Uganda is on its way up. And so I'm hearing all these narratives in the US.
is dictatorship all that bad? Because if you look at the countries in Africa that have been thriving, for example, Libya, it had another dictator at the top. Yeah, was the dictatorship that bad? After all, considering what the democracy they had after him looks like. Because ever since that dictator was overthrown, the country is now probably poorer than Uganda. At that time when they had the dictator, they were one of the richest countries in Africa. They didn't have any debts and etc. They were doing well, but they had a dictator. Sometimes to actually enforce things and strategies and to work through and enforce development, sometimes even you need someone, an iron hand.
Right.
You know. So,
but is that a dictator? I mean, I want to be careful. I know that's the label that the U.S. often uses. You have a strong leader.
No, of course, the thing is a dictator because they stayed in power for so long. Yeah. You know.
But that's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's not necessarily a bad thing.
I think this the typical stereotype when people say dictator, you think of an evil leader who's oppressing people, and that's not happening in Uganda. No, that's not happening. So when we're talking about a dictator being a person who's been in power because he's been in power since the 80s, right? So it's 40 years he's been in power, something like that.
Right. But sometimes you have to bask in your situation.
But he's not. But the benefits that he's brought to the country and the changes that have come to the country have been positive. I mean, you can talk about things that are not perfect, but he's done a lot of positive.
And even he knows that he has not been perfect. Yeah. Clearly, no one is perfect. But so how can we build on what he has done? Something like that. I think that's what patriotism would look at. What can we add on? But now, what patriotism looks like right now is to try to tear down even what he has done.
Yeah, which is the way it is in the U.S. too. In the U.S., they want to look at, because of the legacies related to racism and the slaughter of the Native Americans and all that, then they just want to tear everything down. Not just, so like, for example, white supremacy culture becomes everything from even the very language that we use to even the way we discuss mathematics is racist. And it just becomes ridiculous. You can't tear everything down just because there are some things that are bad. You tear down the things that are bad, but you keep the things that are good and build off of things that are good.
Yeah, so not everything this dictator has
quote
done,
unquote,
are bad per se, because Amin is known as world renowned as a dictator.
But that's my definition of a dictator. Like, he really oppressed.
So yeah, Amin is world renowned as a dictator, and so everyone knows when you say Amin, they just know there's a dictator from Uganda. Actually, he's the most famous Ugandan ever, probably. He's among all Ugandans, he's even more famous than Museveni. He's known in everywhere. Yeah. Because there's even a movie about the last king of Scotland.
Right. Because I remember when I was young, that was all in the news.
Yeah, he's known all over the place, and up to some point. Even when you go to country, there's some person who was interviewing a French person like 10 years back, and they told them Uganda all they knew was Amin. and Amin was dead like 7 years before. But that's all they know, and he has been out of Uganda for like 20, 30 years almost. But then that's all they remember about Uganda. There's Amin.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
But he was oppressive. I mean,
he was oppressive, yeah.
Yeah, and he even persecuted Christians.
He didn't persecute Christians. No. Well, he killed an archbishop. He didn't persecute Christianity. So like, I think what happened is that this man had his if you're for either you're for me or you're against me. Like, so if the archbishop speaks against what he's doing, calls him out, then he will probably take him
If
out.
he speaks against his injustice,
But, yeah.
that's what leading. Because Christians speak
but
out.
it doesn't ban Christianity, because Christianity is
Okay,
to bask in the moment.
nature of persecution. I think there's a misconception of what Christian persecution is.
Yeah.
Christians are almost never persecuted by virtue of the fact that they're Christians. What they're persecuted for is because the things that they teach are a threat to that society. Like, for example, if they're going to a region and people are converting, that's a threat to the traditional values of that society. If you have like a communist country,
But that's not what happened. That's not what happened.
But if Christian leaders are speaking up against the injustices that he's doing and he persecutes them for that, that's the nature of Christian persecution. Christians are almost never persecuted just because they're Christians. That doesn't happen anywhere in the world that I know of where people say, I'm just going to persecute this person because they're Christian. But Christians are persecuted because the values that we have and the things that we teach and things that we say become a threat to the power structure.
In that, if you approach it from that perspective, then he persecuted everyone because he killed a couple of people regardless. So basically, I think he was just killing anyone who is against him, not per se because of your doctrine. As long as you say things against him, then you're not for him. Because in essence, Amin was, in my own way to describe him, I think he was an uneducated Pan-Africanist. Like, he was a Pan-Africanist to the core, but in a sense, uneducated. So he was a very good Ugandan, was a patriot. Because in essence, what he wanted was, okay, yes, you gave us independence, right? But then, all the big businesses are being managed by colored people. Okay, for us, colored in Uganda means white people. You gave us independence, but the richest people in our country are foreigners. So why is an educated? Okay, he could have done it differently, But then he said, for him, from his, not so educated self, he approached like, let me push all these people out of the country and give the property to fellow Ugandans. So at the core of this, what he's saying is he's being patriotic, but then in an uneducated way, because it brought catastrophe in a sense. Yeah, but it wasn't like from a bad spirit for Ugandans. He thought he was doing the best. So now, in essence, I'm thinking a patriot is someone who is doing something to enrich his country. I want the best of my country, and in essence, many Ugandans out there believe Amin was a patriot.
So you can look at everybody as being patriotic. Because there are very few people who don't have that attitude. Like there are very few people who go into a thing, no matter how unjust their actions are, thinking that they're doing the wrong thing. Generally, people think that they're doing the right thing, even when they're not.
So maybe we want to redefine our discussion to patriotism, which is, let's say, ill-informed patriotism.
Is what?
Ill-informed patriotism or uneducated patriotism.
Uneducated patriotism.
Yeah. For example, so maybe by someone going to BBC and telling them how bad Uganda is, they think they're being patriotic, but actually they're ill-informed.
They think they're doing the right thing because they think they're going to bring about change by exposing this.
Yeah, but then it's ill-informed because they're tainting the image. I mean, thought of the patriot, but then it wasn't as per se constructive patriotism. And maybe even out there, not just Uganda, any country out there, most politicians, opposition especially, they are being patriotic many times, but many times they're not being constructive in their patriotism. Because if, let's say, you want to you want to promote tourism in the country because tourism brings money to the country, but then you're telling the world that Uganda is not a peaceful place, we have a dictator, we have we feel of impunity, people will fear to come to the country.
Yeah, and then that's all. None of that is. I'm living here over a year.
Exactly.
None of that's happening. It's
and it will threaten potential investors. People won't come because they think, man, I can't go.
And people are coming because they know that that's not an accurate picture. Yeah. Would churches be sending missionaries, children, their kids, to come over here if this was such a dangerous place to be? And I see that all the time, where entire families are coming in as part of a church on like these short-term missionary things. Would people be doing that if this was such a dangerous place?
So maybe the masses are more informed than we'll think. People have an idea of what is going on. They know how to differentiate between politics and reality. Because from a Ugandan perspective, if you listen to the campaigns in the U.S. over the years, Obama, Trump, and Clinton, and now Trump and Harris, and Trump and Joe Biden,
Bush,
all those things.
all those people.
When you hear these campaigns,
Bushes.
people are Trump is saying bad things about his side. They are saying bad things about. They basically it's basically hate politics. So you would think America is such a horrible place, but the irony is, regardless of what those people of influence are talking, Ugandans are keeping on applying to go to America. Because we don't care about what those guys are saying, something like that. And the same could be said for Americans, because you could see leading opposition people in Uganda, they're always talking bad things about Uganda, but Americans keep floating here.
Yeah. Because when you actually get into America and get within the communities, the various communities that are there, there's a lot of love. I don't mean to sound all like...
You don't have to apologize for saying what you think.
I mean, there's a lot of love and there's a lot of community that's there. And I understand, though, that there's oftentimes divisions that exist between communities, because you've got the very traditional kind of Americans who subscribe to kind of some of the things that we're talking about. And then you've got the more woke and progressive, quote unquote, sometimes the word is used, side of things. And these two groups are often at odds with each other and typically don't want to associate with each other because the values are so polar opposite, and that exists. But when you get within the communities, there is, I think, a lot of good things there that we can build off of, and people, I think, forget that. And maybe I forget that sometimes because I tend to focus much on the divide, I think, because I've been somebody who was in an academic environment, or I was in an environment where the values that were there were not often in line with mine, and it created a lot of tension for me. And so I lived in an environment of tension. And I sometimes forget that the life that I had in the university wasn't necessarily typical of what most people experience. Maybe most people aren't living in an environment of tension.
Yeah, and the media outlets haven't made it any better, because there's an old adage of no news is good news. I think Trump would like that, because he always says the fake news, fake media. So no news would be better news, because right now all the media platforms do is give us bad news, and they only give us bad news, and it's contrary to what we're talking about here. Constructive news, constructive patriotism. Why are you only giving us bad news?
Yeah, because bad news sells, because people watch bad news. The reason, if you watched a news show where it was all good news, nobody wants to watch that.
Is it real that nobody wants to watch that, or is it because that's how society has?
That's the perception. I mean, because I think that if people wanted to watch it, they would. I mean, the reason that the news is so negative, I know in America, everything is based on ratings. Who watches the shows? And if something's not working, the show gets canceled. People aren't watching it based on the ratings; it gets canceled. So
I think even good news would sell. It's just that we have created a culture where it's bad news that sells. Everyone's always looking out for bad news, and we've created an anxiety in the population, in the masses, that everyone wants to look out for what is wrong. How am I safer? Because where am I coming from? Because we have had a couple of good developments in the country. For example, the last 3 years we had Uganda Airlines, restart in Uganda. And trust me, every Ugandan was glued to the screen. They wanted to see that plane flying off. That was good news. Yeah. And everyone wanted to see it. So basically, if there is good news out there, it's actually people want to see. But we have created so much anxiety and tension in people that now they seem to be more attuned to negative news than the good news. It doesn't mean we don't necessarily like the good news. It's just because that's how we have been socialized, that it's a bad news that sells.
Yeah. So in the U.S., the way the news works, all the bad news gets covered early in the news broadcast, and then you go into the weather, and then you go into sports, but it ends with like a human interest story, something positive that somebody did, but you always put that good news story at the end.
Don't you think
beginning.
This is all crafted with some intention behind?
The intention, I think, is to pull people in, because it's like the idea of, if you see a car accident, people want to gawk at the accident. they want to look at it when they're driving by. But like in America, if there was a dog that got lost in California and they were from Michigan and they lost the dog and somehow the dog tracked across the whole country and found its way home to Michigan, and that's like great human interest story. That would make probably the end of the broadcast, not the beginning. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that would be a headlining story. I don't know, but I would.
Maybe if things were the reverse. Maybe we talk about the good things first.
Yeah, what if we did?
But even you tell someone, okay, I have good news and bad news. Which one first? Everyone said bad news first.
Bad news first. Yeah.
Well, because
Give me the bad news. Yeah, that's what I would say. Give me the bad news. So I want to end with the good news.
Yeah, because the good news I think would give them some.
But that's also what happens. Why with the news? Because you watch the news and you're down, depressed, and then you end with something positive, so people leave the show like all happy and up.
Yeah, maybe that's the intention.
Yeah, maybe that's the intention.
Anyway, so back to our core topic today. Would you want to wrap up on that?
Yeah, so I think it's been an interesting discussion about maybe... See, at first, because I think I've kind of evolved in my thinking. And when I first started this conversation, I had in my mind what I thought patriotism was. But then through the course of this conversation with you, I've realized that patriotism can be a kind of a subjective sort of feeling of whether or not you feel that you're patriotic. And that even the people who are doing destructive things, in their mind, they might be doing it for patriotic reasons of what their sense of patriotism is, what they feel their sense of duty is. It's just in the same way that the anti-Trump people are so scared of Trump and see him as such an evil man, whether or not he is or not, but they feel patriotic by attacking him and by doing everything they can to stop him from gaining power, because they think that he's a danger to the country, although they might have some delusions, about that. They're maybe misguided into thinking, but that's what they sincerely and honestly believe. And so what I'm trying to say is, whatever your perspective of what's best for the country, it's always better to find constructive ways to bring about change. And it's never a good thing to try to say that you can tear the system down, tear it all down and build it up, because in the course of tearing it all down, you could create an environment that could lead to civil war, to conflict, to people, being hurt and killed, and it can be a very dangerous kind of approach to go at it, to bring about divisiveness, to bring about change.
You're creating a polarized environment, society, which is not helpful for the society. It just keeps society in tension and people hating each other. So we want to actually give credit where it's due, even if it's someone we don't necessarily, subscribe to their notions all the time. Sometimes if we do something good, talk about it. To end on a good note, we are in Uganda, and many bad things have been talked about Uganda. Maybe we want to take a small video about where we're standing at, the small space where we're at, and we record for our viewers to see, that this Uganda is not as bad as people think. Because I think the less educated American, the one who is in, let's say, in the most remote part of America, would think Uganda is just a jungle. So we shall record a small clip and we shall add it at the end.
Yeah, okay. All right. And enjoy the videos after this when we show you about what's around here.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, so we said we'd give you a video showing a few things in Uganda, and so right now we're at the lake, so we are showing you it wouldn't be a coastline, it would be the shores of the lake, Victoria.
Yeah.
So you can see
shoreline.
Yeah, so you can see that then the vegetation at a further distance. There is a pretty nice hotel at the other side of the shores. We're going to show you other spaces, but for now this is where we're at. And so now you can see this sort of avenue, the few trees next to the lake, and so it's a Sunday and people are, Sunday is like time for family in Uganda, so people are home and either go to church and they go home. So we're having this is closer to the beach, so there are a few destinations for tourists where you can come. This is a place where you can sleep. There are a couple of places, so we're just filming somewhere close to where we are recording from, so that necessarily means it's the only space.
All right, welcome to Victoria Mall in Entebbe. So this is a rather interesting place. There's a parking lot. There's a movie theater in there. Grocery store, lots of different shops. And for those that like Kentucky Fried Chicken, there's even a Kentucky Fried Chicken. Got a Middle Eastern restaurant here. Cafe Java is over here. So yeah, and there's a hotel in there as well. So here we are along Kampala Road in Entebbe. If you head in this direction, that'll take you to Kampala. And then over here, that'll take you deeper into Entebbe. So, got a statue of a lion here. And what? Oh, and the mall's back here. So, yeah, lots of traffic in here. Although it's Sunday, it's not as busy as it normally is.